Today is a day to remember, as this morning in Montreal, 196 nations have agreed a global biodiversity framework. I am Simone Detling, Head of Banking at UNEP-FI, and I have with me my colleague Jessica Smith, Head of Nature, who was at the negotiations in Montreal. And we welcome you to a discussion today to talk about this historic agreement and, importantly, its implications for the financial industry. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Simone. So glad to be here.
Jessica, the UN Secretary General has heralded this agreement as humanity's peace treaty with nature. But what exactly is in this global biodiversity framework, and why is it such a historic agreement on par with the Paris Climate Agreement a few years ago?
Thank you. Well, I certainly concur that this is an incredible moment for nature. The headline goal coming out of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is that we will collectively work towards halting and reversing nature loss by 2030. So that's the 1.5 degree equivalent. And this includes restoring 30% of land and water, freshwater and oceans by 2030 as well. We will be working towards living in harmony with nature by 2050 and sharing the benefits from nature fairly, including with Indigenous peoples and local communities who are frontline stewards of nature. We also have the headline goal to ensure that there are adequate resources for implementation of this framework, including the alignment of all financial flows, public and private. So that is the Paris 2.1C equivalent.
Okay, Jessica, our executive director, Inger Anderson, and hearing this, I think she's quite right. She has framed this as our chance to shore up and strengthen the web of life so it can carry the full weight of generations to come. And when I listen to you, it sounds like there is a very strong, a key role to be played by the financial industry, especially also by the global banking sector. And at UNEP-FI, of course, we host the world's foremost sustainable banking framework, the Principles for Responsible Banking, with more than 300 signatories worldwide, representing about half of the world's assets. So to these members, what do you say? What can they do to play their role in achieving these goals, and what are the implications for them going forward?
Absolutely. There's so many, and some are calling for voluntary action, and some are regulatory requirements that they need to be getting themselves and their clients ready for. So there are 23 very meaningful targets under the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. I won't go through all 23, but many of them are extremely relevant to the financial sector, including banking. So target 15 was called the business target, or the TNFD target, that calls for monitoring, assessing, and transparently disclosing risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity. So this calls on companies and financial institutions, particularly large and transnational companies and financial institutions, to disclose these risks. So we should expect jurisdictions to be legislating to this effect, so bringing TNFD type assessment and disclosure into regulation in major jurisdictions, covering most of the world's economic activity. Target 19 is also significant. It calls for a considerable growth in financing for nature and biodiversity, including from private finance, and encouraging the private sector to invest in biodiversity, including through impact funds and other instruments. Also stimulating innovative schemes like payment for ecosystem services, green bonds, biodiversity credits, and other types of instruments. And also optimizing co-benefits and synergies with climate finance for biodiversity. Target 18 deals with the removal of harmful subsidies and the financing of harmful activities. Target 16 calls for reducing pollution and unsustainable consumption, including food waste, which will be of interest to your policies. So there's much to be digested and considered in terms of what are the voluntary calls and what are the actions that are going to be regulated with the update of national biodiversity strategy and action plans in the coming year in response to this framework. Also, not actually in the framework itself, but at the COP, we had a historical announcement from Emmanuel Faber of the IFRS Foundation that the ISSB will be extending its work to natural ecosystems and just transition. So the accounting frameworks for sustainability will also be grown and updated to include these important topics. So there's quite a lot happening in this space. I won't go further, but there's going to be a lot to unpack in the weeks and months ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. And of course, the United Nations system will be geared to support the implementation of this framework. And this also includes UNEP-FI. And what we just heard from you, I think there will be a lot to do for our member banks. Can you let them know how we will support them in this task?
Absolutely. So our member banks need to be getting ready to align their portfolios to the Kunming-Montreal Agreement as they have been working towards Paris alignment. So we actually have created guidance in advance of this agreement to prepare Principles for Responsible Banking signatories, working with a group of 30 of our member banks to prepare that. We will now update it with the final framework. We will have a working group of our member banks to support each other during the process and handhold those who are fast tracking to be ahead of their peers in setting portfolio-wide biodiversity targets for land, freshwater, and oceans. We also recommend that all member banks assess their dependencies and impacts on nature using the Encore tool that is freely available. We encourage you to consider piloting the TNFD beta framework, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures framework, which links to Target 15 now. And really look at your high impact sectors, and many of these are tied to food and agriculture, which are also related to emissions. Then look for new nature finance opportunities. So there seems to be a lot of wonderful proof of concepts out there. Those need to be expanded and they need to be looking for ways to finance nature equitably so that Indigenous peoples and local communities are benefiting from new financial flows for nature. Also, every single country will be updating its national biodiversity strategy and action plan, including a new financing plan alongside with a target for private finance. So there's an opportunity to engage nationally with those processes in every single country that you operate. Now, most Principles for Responsible Banking signatories have set their first impact target on climate. You can also look for opportunities to leverage finance for nature linked to nature-based solutions to climate. So there's a lot of work ahead, but we are definitely here to handhold with all of our member banks. We're also going to be having regular exchanges with other platforms like the Principles for Sustainable Insurance, the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation, the Science-Based Targets Network, and other to make sure that we're all moving along the same direction at pace. Many of our members are also in the Partnership for Biodiversity Accounting Financials, so we will be looking for opportunities there. Now, finally, the Principles for Responsible Banking benefits from a wonderful civil society advisory body that contains a number of conservation and nature-related organizations like Conservation International, WWF, Share Action, and IFRS Foundation. Given that the framework also mentions Indigenous peoples 18 times, we will also be looking at how the civil society advisory body could be strengthened by bringing in the views of Indigenous peoples.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. So we will, as before at UNEP-FI, bring together this largest community of sustainable bankers worldwide and work together to shape guidance for the global financial sector on how to play a key role in achieving the goals of this new agreement on biodiversity, and very specifically on how to set and deliver targets to align their business with these biodiversity goals. Jessica, thank you very much for your time, for sharing with us the implications of this new global biodiversity framework for the financial industry in general, and the signatories of the Principles for Responsible Banking in particular. And for all of you, follow UNEP-FI on our social media channels to stay up to date with our information on banking and biodiversity, and let us know if you have questions or comments. Thank you, and see you soon.